House Leader of the Third Party.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Just, I think, following up on the question around corrections and mental health in corrections, just a pretty high-level question for the Minister, just with respect to what the philosophy is in our correctional system.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I would sum it up in two phrases: protect communities and reduce reoffending.
Member.
Yeah, is it the idea of our correction system to rehabilitate those that are in it and to reduce the recidivism rates?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Yes, it is.
Member.
Thank you. From that perspective, just wondering what the Minister feels about the use of solitary confinement in our correction system.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question from the member. So first, we don't use the term solitary confinement anymore. We do have separate confinement, and it is for use for two particular circumstances. One, if the individual is a danger to themselves, and two, or they're a danger to others, and they are, if they are in that, it is for the absolute minimum amount of time.
Member.
Are they by themselves?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Not exclusively. The majority are, but sometimes there will be with another person.
Member.
So can the Minister provide the reason why we've changed the how we refer to this this technique, I guess, or this this tool that is used in our correction system from solitary confinement to separate confinement? If is it because there are occurrences where the technique or the tactic is used and there are times where people are together?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So we have not used that term for quite a long time now. And I would say one of the reasons is that it is often viewed in the context of the public as a form of punishment. And the policies we have in place are that separate confinement is not used for punishment, but rather, as I said, for those who may be a risk to themselves or a risk to others. And you asked me if, and I said sometimes there may be two people in separate confinement, and that may sound a little counterintuitive in terms of at a risk to themselves, but what we can, and it varies from situation to situation, but it is sometimes a situation where someone who is suicidal, actually having another person there is actually beneficial. And so, there are circumstances that are taken into account as to when it is used.
Member.
Thank you. I guess what, and perhaps this might be worthwhile for us to have a separate conversation about this in further detail. I've heard, I think there is use in me raising it here on the record as well, because the stories that I've heard are of this being used, separate confinement being used as inmate punishment, also as management. So they're, having and I think the minister just talked about this. Also have had conversations with respect to the impact around increased depression, deteriorated cognitive skills, hallucinations. I think we see studies that show that that the impact, and this is why I was asking what the point of the correction system was, because it seemed like this practice works against the goal of rehabilitating or reducing recidivism. And so that's why I think I've raised this issue in other parts of this legislature and wanted to just raise it here as well. So I think it's probably better for a conversation further down the road somewhere else. I do want to move to policing. I was part of the special committee to review the Police Act, and we did 15 months of work as a committee, and April 28th of last year we tabled our final report. There were 11 recommendations in that report covering new Community Safety and Policing Act, civilian-led accountability and oversight, better training and support to transform policing culture, a new provincial police service, equitable funding, equitable police distribution, Indigenous involvement, improved local, regional accountability, and better governance mechanisms. Essentially, but we also recommended that the minister depoliticize this process of police reform in our province by creating an all-party committee that was able to leverage the consensus that special committee that the minister stood up had been able to build during that 15-month process. We noted that transforming policing in this province is a multi-year, multi-parliament, likely a multi-government, I'll say maybe a multi-government process. It could actually be multiple governing relationships like we had in the confidence and supply agreement as an example. So there's all sorts of different outcomes that could happen over the time. Why did the minister choose to ignore the recommendation and not create an all-party committee to work with the Ministry of Public Safety to implement the recommendations and to oversee policing reform in our province?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I thank the member for the question. And I just want to first off start by saying I have not ruled out, government has not ruled out the creation of an all-party committee. We have a new ADM who's busy going through, working within my ministry on those recommendations, on the work that because as you rightly said, this is a multi-parliament government effort. We are looking, as I've said, at a first phase of amendments in the Police Act in the fall, but it's going to be, it's a staged process. But we are still actively working on the recommendations, actively working on what's involved, and we have not ruled out an all-party committee.
Member.
Thank you. 12 months have passed since that. The official opposition has a new leader, a different, perhaps a different culture. We have the issue that the minister just addressed in Surrey. We have the issues in the Capital Regional District here. We've got multiple detachments in the RCMP suffering from staffing shortages. There's no end of work that could benefit from work by all three political parties, all three caucuses in here that could have assisted and would have assisted, I would suspect, the minister and the ministry in decision-making around the Surrey policing situation as an example. The fact is that I respect the fact the minister has not I guess, has left the door open to the fact that a committee could still be struck. But doesn't the minister see that the 12 months that has been between the tabling of the report and now, a lost opportunity to maintain the momentum that was generated of the 15 months of work that we did? I can say to the minister that as a member that was working on that committee, I really feel that the work that we did, the momentum has been lost, and we see it showing up in question period. We see it showing, the politics of it showing up in quotes and responses, whereas when we were working together on this, there was consensus building opportunities that are now lost. Does the minister not see the 12 months that as lost opportunity?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And I understand where the member's coming from, and I appreciate that he wants to ensure that momentum is not dropped and that the work of the committee is not ignored. And I can absolutely tell him that the work of the committee is absolutely not being ignored and is very fundamental in the work that's taken place within my ministry in terms of reforming the Police Act. And it's you know, I look forward to when that comes forward, the member seeing his work reflected in the changes. But I just want to let the member know about the work that has taken place to date in terms of within the ministry and that engagement to ensure that the momentum from the committee's report is actively ongoing and is going to be a key component of what we're able to bring forth. So the ministry's engaged so far with 12 First Nations, modern treaty nations, friendship centres, in Caribou, Nawakan, Commodity, Friendship Association of Prince Rupert, the Indigenous Leadership Organizations, the BC First Nations Justice Council, the First Nations Leadership Council, the Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner, the Independent Investigations Office, the BC Association of Chiefs of Police, their Modernization Subcommittee, the BC Police Association, the police boards, police board chairs, Chief of the Organized Crime Agency Board, Transit Police, the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner, the UBCM, and my advisory council on multiculturalism and police victim services. So we've been engaged with all of those in part to be able to do the work that's necessary to move this forward. And does it take a long time? Yeah, it does. And I know this, the member knows this, and I know it, is government does not necessarily move at the fastest pace, but it does move. And so I just want the member to know that the work is taking place, and the work of the committee is very much part and parcel of why that work is taking place.
Member.
Why did the minister initially establish an all-party committee to review and make recommendations to reform the Police Act?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question. And I think it's fair to say that at the time the committee was struck, there was, I think, a significant amount of public concern about policing, not just here in British Columbia, but in fact in many parts of the country. And I think that there is a sense that there need to be changes in a number of areas, and some of the more mental health. I think that the issue around mental health and policing, which has been an issue, really kind of, I think, came to the surface, as did issues around governance in policing and how it relates to police boards, for example. I think reports that we have seen at the national level around the RCMP were also, part and parcel. And so all of those things, and I think the government's view was, the all-party committee is a way to bring forward and to hear what people have to say, and to bring forward ideas, recommendations, which they did. And I think that's how the genesis, if you like, of the committee in the first place. And as I've said, I think the work of the committee was excellent work, and is very much foundational in terms of the work that's been underway within my ministry, and that first phase being expected in the fall. And part of the approach is to make sure, that it is that we are doing those consultations with people who, let me rephrase it, that it's important that the development of it, the consultation is reflected, the consultation that's taking place is reflective of the people who made presentations and upon whom policing impacts. And that's one of the reasons, for example, the co-development that's been taking place with First Nations, for example.
Member.
Thank you. For the past several months, while we've been in here, we have heard a persistent approach by the official opposition around public safety, around policing, and around prolific offenders, brought into probably the least useful part of the business that happens in this place in question period. The most useful place where the business happens actually happens in this room that we're in today, where we worked for those 15 months, collaboratively, all three parties building consensus. And I guess where I'm lost in this is that the minister saw and has spoken very clearly about the effectiveness, the efficacy of that committee, then chooses to abandon the very process right after we had tabled a consensus report, decided to become very insular about it, take it within the ministry to do the work, rather than to do what the recommendation was to strike that committee, an oversight committee that could help whatever government is in place to be able to deliver on the recommendations in collaboration with the minister. Ultimately, it's still the minister's responsibility. But what was lost in that was the collaborative approach, the consensus-building approach that has now been troubling the same minister over the last number of months, because immediately the issue became repoliticized again. So we had a situation that depoliticized the issue. All of us learned from that process. That was then abandoned. The issue was repoliticized. And I think it came up, it came in and showed itself in this most recent decision that was needed to be made around Surrey. Rather than making it a decision of the legislature, it became a decision of the minister. And I think that in the end, what happened was we weakened that process. We have lost 12 months of good work because the decision was to become insular, or the decision was to be insular about it. Does the minister support the creation of a provincial police service that's not the RCMP?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So I'll address the two issues. In terms of the Provincial Police Service, look, that's one of the recommendations in the report. And it is an initiative that is very complex, and that's why I've asked my staff to look into what would be involved in that. The report itself acknowledges that, you know, the recommendations would take many parliaments, and I think in that recommendation, I think that's the one that would take that. Not the least of which there's a contract in place till 2032. But the reality is there would be a lot of work to understand the implications of that, but also, what would be various options. And so my staff has got, will be working on that to provide information to myself as minister. In terms of Surrey, I understand what the member's saying, but the reality is I'm guided by the legislation. I'm guided by the act itself that says I have to make that determination based on the advice I get from the Director of Police Services. It's not a political decision. It's based on the issue of public safety and the advice that I get from my Director of Police Services and the analysis that they're required to do in terms of a transition plan. So there's a very specific legislative process that I have to follow. So I can't, delegate that decision to anybody else. And as I said, the issue of of a provincial police force, that's a complex issue which my staff would have to do a significant amount of work on.
Member.
Yeah, I think this is exactly the reason why I've been asking about the all-party committee, because we've lost 12 months. We've actually, I think the problem that I feel is the biggest challenge that we now face, based on the fact that instead of continuing to engage all of the political parties in this legislative assembly, a burden that we all carry, public safety. It's the burden that the minister carries specifically as a minister of the government, but it's a burden that all of us should feel we carry some part of. The project always was going to be a decade-long project. We saw it in New Zealand. It's a decade-long project to transform policing, to transform culture, to make sure the training's in place, to make sure the governance, the regional and local governance is in place, to make sure that the communities, Indigenous nations are involved. That was always going to be a decade-long project. Precisely the reason why we recommended the all-party committee was to ensure that we didn't lose the consensus that was established in that report. I've been in this place every single day that it's been open since then, and I feel zero confidence that that consensus still exists. I feel the 15 months of work that we did to build that consensus, to build trust across party lines, likely doesn't exist anymore. That's what was sacrificed when the minister decided to bring it entirely in-house and to carry the burden alone. And what I fear is that the work that we did on paper is still good work. You can look at the recommendations. But the political landscape in this place, the political landscape in communities like Surrey that has the largest detachment, that's the reason why the question, does the minister agree with or how does the minister feel about a provincial police service, is an important question, because the largest RCMP detachment, as the minister said in question period the other day, is in Surrey. It is political chaos there. So I understand that the minister has to follow the act, but also the government has to be tracking the political nightmare that's being created in local government elections, and the recognition that there's multiple layers of politics at the local level and at the provincial level. That's why all of these questions are applicable, because the reality is that if we continued a committee that had all of us sitting around the table, we would be forced into a position to work together in a way that has now been lost. And so that's how all of these questions that I'm asking actually fit together, is because the work, if an all-party committee is struck now, we start from the beginning again. And the minister's right. The RCMP contract ends in 2032. That's less than 10 years from now. The decade window that I'm giving in these questions is a deliberate one, because it might have taken 10 years for us to responsibly transition. But we've lost a year, and we've lost a whole lot of political goodwill that we worked very hard around that table to maintain. We deliberated for hours to get to a position that all the parties could agree on. The minister could have taken a hold of that and continued to make that the culture around the discussion around here, instead of what we hear in question period day in and day out, which is just yelling back and forth about policing and public safety, not making our communities more safe, in fact, making the entire discussion more toxic. That's what I fear about this situation. Police accountability is the thing that the public is most concerned about. We invited Vancouver Police Chief Adam Palmer to the committee twice to get their perspective on systemic racism. Twice that police chief couldn't acknowledge systemic racism. I believe it was twice, if my memory serves me correctly. Then in the media, Chief Palmer brazenly states he's not accountable to the City of Vancouver, not accountable to the province, not accountable to the federal government. The minister said in question period that he is accountable. Accountable to who?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the comments from the member, and I want to acknowledge that. Look, I totally understand where he's coming from, but I also want to make it clear that the work of the committee is foundational in the work that's been undergoing the last 12 months, and I do believe, and as I said, we have not made a decision on not constituting an all-party committee. But I think that the work is something that all members of the House, I think, support the work that took place. And I mean, it gets raised in question period, and it is political. But at the same time, it is still around the fundamental issue of issues that were raised at the committee, whether it is often on mental health, whether it is about policing, whether it's about root causes of crime, whether it's about governance, all of those things. There's work underway dealing with that, and as I said, we have not said no to the all-party committee. But I just want to address the issue of accountability that the member raises. A police chief, a police organization, is absolutely accountable to the community it represents. The police chief is accountable to the police board. The police are accountable to the public. And to say otherwise is simply not correct.
Member.
Thank you. I agree entirely. Unfortunately, in the quote, all it was who that police chief wasn't accountable to. There wasn't the context of exactly who that individual is accountable to. We have, and I agree, police chiefs are entirely accountable to their police board. And through their police board to all of those other individuals and organizations and community groups that the minister was talking about. But as the story was told, it was just, I'm not accountable to the City of Vancouver. Technically, that's not true. Technically, that individual is entirely accountable to the City of Vancouver. Maybe not the mayor and council, but the police board and the city and the citizens in the city. So the reality is that we've got a situation where a chief of one of the largest police services in the province, one of the most, I think, well-known and public services, is out saying in the public who they're not accountable to, not who they are accountable to. And I think that it's very troubling, and the reason why I'm raising this is because it paints a picture for the public about the direction that their police services are going. And without the very strong response from everybody, and that's the reason why I wanted to raise it here, is because I think it gives an opportunity for the minister again to be very clear to the public who it is that the chiefs of police, we give incredible amount of power. And we need to be consistently reminding that there are checks and balances on that power. And that was one of the fundamental pieces of the Police Act, was an independent, civilian-led transparency and accountability body that brings together all of the different bodies. We've got 3 of them right now. We've got the IIO, we've got the Police Complaints Commissioner, and we've got the civilian group that's currently reviewing the Community and Industry Response Group, the RCMP group out of Ottawa. So in this province, we've got this fragmented police accountability system. We have our ability to address 2 of them. We have no ability to address the one that goes all the way to Ottawa, or very limited ability. During the, and accountability is, again, just to point it out, that's the concern that we consistently heard from the public that they're concerned about. We also heard that there's another policing body or another enforcement body in this province that has no direct accountability. They're not, the Police Complaints Commissioner is not involved. Perhaps the IIO might get involved if there was a death involved, but this is the Conservation Service. There's 0 independent oversight of the Conservation Service in this province. Minister talks, and I've asked a number of questions in question period to the minister about policing and accountability, and the minister consistently responds about the arm's length relationship between politicians and law enforcement, but that doesn't even exist in the Conservation Service. This is basically, the Conservation Service, as I've been able to understand it, is basically a private army, or it's a provincial army. It's directly responsible to the Minister of the Environment. No independent accountability or oversight. The COS, to their credit, the former chief stated clearly in our consultations that they should have oversight. It's a recommendation in the Police Act report, one that's not been brought in. The union, on the other hand, said absolutely not. They don't want to have anything to do with oversight, independent. They want to treat every one of these incidents as if it's a human resources, or if it's as if it's a union disciplinary process, an administrative process. But they have no authority or expertise in the law enforcement expertise behind it. I've had meetings with former COS members over the last number of months. They paint a terrible picture of the culture in that organization. Again, no oversight, Minister, none. I'm really concerned that we have a well-armed enforcement agency with little or no oversight. Internal complaints are handled internally. Does the minister feel this is acceptable?
Minister.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. So I appreciate the question from the member, and I can tell him that I am aware of the view that there is a view that there needs to be more oversight in terms of the conservation service that he's been talking about. I can also tell him that there is a regulation dealing with the Conservation Service. They are special police provincial constables, and that there is a regulation, a disciplinary regulation that is in place that people can make a complaint to, that would be the Director of Police Services about. That's what's in place now, but I am aware of the issue that the member has raised.
Member.
Thank you. So one of the hats that the hook that the hat gets hung on is that there is an arm's length relationship between the political body and police services or enforcement bodies. No such arm's length relationships exist. I think the people of BC would be shocked to find out that actually this BC Conservation Service can be directed by the government. It does not have the same arm's length relationship as other policing services in the province. These are individuals that carry and work with high-powered rifles. They can bring those high-powered rifles home, which, as I understand, is unique. And if you were in the RCMP, for example, that wouldn't happen. Now, the argument that's been given is that these individuals work in rural British Columbia, and it's not always an opportunity to lock them up like the RCMP might be required to. So the high-powered rifles go home at the end of the day. In training, these individuals are basically asked to act like police officers, but they're not police officers. They are special constables, but they are the Conservation Service. And so, and at times, they're asked to actually work alongside the RCMP because we have a scenario in our province where the RCMP are understaffed. And so sometimes they work in concert with the RCMP from what I understand. When I've been receiving information about a culture of homophobia, transphobia, of bullying, of racism, and I've been trying to navigate through the provincial government a myriad of the ombudsperson, the public service agency. I am finding it absolutely impossible to find that accountability that the minister says exists. My experience over the last number of months in trying to deal with this and trying to bring this to attention, that accountability does not exist. I cannot bring this, as I understand it, to the Police Complaints Commissioner and have them look into it. I met with the ombudsperson. I was encouraged to take it to the Public Safety Agency, or Public Service Agency. The Public Service Agency got me in front of the new chief. That was the process. The process was I was to bring these very sensitive issues directly to the person who oversees internal accountability of these internal issues. There's no arm's length separated process that is safe for people to do this. We raised this in our police, Reforming Police Act report 1 year ago. Nothing has changed. This government has sat on this knowing the problem. As the minister said, he's aware of the problem. When will this service, this conservation service, a much needed service in our province, when will it have the same level of accountability as other enforcement agencies in this province? And when will we be able to see that it has an arm's length relationship from the politicians, because currently it does not?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question and the commentary from the member, and I know that it was recommendation number 9, and I can tell you that on that issue of accountability in governance, there is a considerable amount of work underway in the ministry on these issues that the minister has raised, including the last ones. I said we're aware of the problem. I also would make the point. The Conservation Service lies within the Ministry of the Environment, doesn't lie within this ministry, but in terms of the recommendations out of the police, the SCORPA, that work has been underway. So it's not a question of sitting on something and ignoring something, but rather it's the policy, it's about policy work that needs to be done on this recommendation and all the other recommendations that are in there. And I can tell you that, as I said, we're aware of it. There is work underway in terms of governance accountability. And I think all of us want to make sure that when there are agencies who are charged with enforcement, that there are proper accountability measures in place that the public has confidence in.
Member.
Thank you. And I'm well aware that, where this Conservation Service lies. In fact, I've raised this with the Minister of the Environment, but they are special constables. So while their service is within the Ministry of the Environment, we grant them similar powers to the powers that we grant to a municipal police service and an RCMP police service. But yet we have absolutely no accountability mechanisms to ensure that when stuff goes bad, that the public can be certain that those members are going to be held accountable. The union was clear. The union wanted to have no further powers granted to anybody. Credit the former chief of the Conservation Service who said, absolutely, bring it on. In fact, it'll help with the credibility of this service. For 1 year, since we tabled those recommendations, there has not been more accountability measures put in place for the Conservation Service. I've been dealing with individuals who have been bringing their stories to me because there is no safe place for them to bring them to. Everywhere where they've gone, it has been a threat for them. These are vulnerable individuals. This government is providing them no safety to be able to have the ability to be a constructive part of changing the culture of that organization. So they come to me to do it. I'm not the place for that to happen. And so I know the minister knows who they are. I know the minister knows what the recommendation is. What I'm worried about is that every day that passes, the people who we task with that work are vulnerable. They have no place to raise their complaints to that is not going to be investigated by their own superiors. People who are often the ones that might be treating them in those awful ways. There is no confidence, there should be zero confidence from the public that if an incident happens, that there is a place for that incident to be properly handled in an independent, not even civilian-led, just an independent way. When I hear that there's a lot of work being done, tomorrow is 1 day later where vulnerable people are left vulnerable. When is the valuable work that's being done going to come to fruition and this provincial army, basically, will be brought in to a level of accountability and transparency that the public can be confident about, and that the members can achieve the level of safety that they should already have been granted a year ago when we raised this issue.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And again, I thank the member for the question, and I want to make a number of points in response to his commentary. First, in terms of accountability, because they're special police constables, if there is an incident, and the member has used the term army a couple of times and carbines a couple of times, that if there was an incident involving a weapon, an injury, or someone is shot, the IAO has jurisdiction over that, and that is oversight. The member raises issues around culture, toxicity of culture, homophobia, transphobia, all of those things. PSAC is the place to deal with that. PSAC is the place to deal with those things. And at the same time, the member wants to see additional accountability measures. As I've said, there is work underway within my ministry around that. I've said that in terms of governance and accountability, we are going to see that first phase in terms of amendments in place in the fall. But the work has to take place. The work has to be done, and it's not a question of, as I said in response to the member's previous question on this, of it's just not taking place. The reality is it is taking place and has been taking place under the last 12 months.